Our topic this morning is entitled Christ's Marvelous Love for Us. And let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt in your life that you have not been loved? Has there been a moment, it's a personal question, please don't answer outright. Has there been a moment in your life that you have not been loved? What was the feeling like? Were you lonely? Did you feel unworthy? That moment when you felt that the world was against you and you did not feel love, what did you want to do? Did you look for love? And did you look at the right places? And if you did you find the love that you were looking for? Today, I want us to focus on Christ's marvelous love for us. What does that love look like? Especially during the times when we are going through the lowest point in our lives. This week, I was brought to tears by the story of the little girl whom they buried yesterday, Charlotte O'Brien. If you haven't been following the story, it is the most saddest story. I know that countless stories like this happened, but her story is probably one of the one that I will never forget. Charlotte was 12. 3 weeks ago, she could not take it anymore. Her life, she had come to the point where there was a hole that she was in. It was so dark. There was no light. And the little tiny light that she could see was so far away, and she could not reach that light. And she did the most unthinkable thing that any parent could ever imagine that she did. She took her own life. And that's the saddest thing. School became a war zone for her. Her thoughts were constantly being interrupted with words, unkind words, and words that any 12-year-old could not hear. And it just became so much for her. But as I read her story and watched her funeral was yesterday, and the story that she had to endure the countless years of mistreatment, not at home, at school, and finally to the point that there was no point for her to go on. She did not feel loved in a world that people portrayed that there is love. She did not feel that love. So that day, her stepfather actually described the day as the happiest that he'd ever seen her. But for Charlotte, that would be the last for her. She spent the day with the people that she loved. She kept them happy. And just before she took her own life, she wrote a nice piece of message. And she thanked her stepfather for being the captain of the ship, and that he had steered the water for her in such calmness, even though the sea was rough for her. And this is the poem that she had left for her stepfather. And she thanked her mom for being her best friend, and that she encouraged the mom to look after the younger brother, little brother. And, as I was preparing my sermon this week, I couldn't stop thinking about this little girl, Charlotte. And as they laid her to rest yesterday, there was only one thing that ran past, that came through my mind, is that what sort of love are we showing in our church, in our workplace, in our school, especially for people like us who represent the God of love, So I want us to be encouraged with this message this morning. And I'd like to tell you a story. This is a story I have told many times. My father told me this story. I've told my kids. I'm hoping that they will continue on with this story. So on a cold Christmas Eve in 1952, when Korea was in the throes of civil war, one young woman struggled along a village street. Obviously, soon to deliver a child, she pleaded with the passers-by, "Help me, please help me." No one paid attention to her. The middle-aged couple who walked by pushed past the young pregnant women and sneered at her. "Where's the father? Where's your American man now? Go and ask him for help." The couple laughed and went on. The young woman almost doubled up from a contraction as she watched them go. "Please," she begged, "please help me." Then she looked across the bridge and she saw a little house not so far away. She had heard of a missionary living nearby who might be of help to her. Hurriedly, she began walking to that village. If only that young missionary could help me. But it was cold. It was snowing. The place was blanketed in snow. Shivering and in pain, she struggled over the frozen countryside. But the night was cold, and the snow began to fall in blankets. Realizing that the time was near to deliver her baby, she took shelter under a bridge. There alone, her baby was born. Guess what? On Christmas Eve. Worried about her newborn son, she took off her clothes. She wrapped them around her. She had only thin layers under her, but she knew that if her baby was to survive, she needed to give the last piece of clothing that she had. She took the clothes off and wrapped the baby and held him close in the warm circle of her arms. The next day, the missionary, as usual, braved the new snow to deliver the Christmas packages across the bridge. As he walked along, he heard the cry, "Could it be of a baby?" He followed the sound to the bridge. Under it, he found a young mother, frozen to death, still clutching her crying newborn son. The missionary tenderly lifted the baby out of her arms. When the baby was 10 years old, his now adopted father decided to tell him the story about how he came to be and about his mom who gave her life for him. The young boy cried, realizing the sacrifice that his mom had made for him. The next morning, the missionary rose early to find the boy's bed empty. Seeing a fresh set of small footprints in the snow outside, he bundled up warmly in a tree coat and followed the trail. Guess where it led? To the bridge where the young mother had died. As the missionary approached the bridge, he stopped, stunned. Kneeling in the snow was his son, naked and shivering uncontrollably. His clothes lay beside him in a small pile. Moving closer, he heard the boy say through chattering teeth, "Mother, were you this cold for me the day you died for me?" The story reminds me of another mother and son who sacrificed so much. One night, Jesus left his home, his glory, and the warmth of heaven to be born in a stable to an unwelcome world. Just before he was born, Mary, his mother, was not welcome in a cozy part of the inn in Bethlehem. Instead, she delivered her baby in the darkness of a cold stable. Believe me, I did not mean to make you all cry. It's just a lovely story that's an introduction to my sermon. She delivered her baby in the darkness of a cold stable. The creator of the universe, the perfect judge who would destroy the world with a single word, was willing to endure this auspicious beginning for you and me. That, ladies and gentlemen, is unconditional love. You know, God, the very nature of God is love. The very nature. We see God in the Bible as all powerful. God is omnipresent. He's omniscient. Yes, he's everywhere. We can see him. He lives forever and ever. But do you know that the very nature of God is love? He created you and I in love, and therefore he's created this perfect universe, and he's put Adam and Eve to take care of that place for us, that beautiful garden that he had created. But our parents sinned, and therefore God had to turn to plan B. And he's now gone back, created a beautiful place, a new earth for us, where we will live with him in paradise. But not only that, he's coming back to take us home. Is that not love? Is that not his nature to save us? 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. So for you and I, we need to show what love is to a world where there is no love, to a world that's dying, to a world that's chaotic. We've been having some deep discussions in our home about where the world is heading, how everything is looking, what's happening every day. If you look around you, there are your thoughts cannot remain pure. We have come to the point where our world is so sick that if we continue on in this world, not that anything, we're waiting as we wait for our Lord. As we continue to live in this world will never get better. But this morning's sermon, God is telling us that if we want to really live in love and know love, we have to tend to this man whose very nature is love. That is the only way we will see love in a world that's sick. Let me tell you, the US government provides a military funeral for members of armed forces. Upon request of the family, it often features guards of honor, the firing of shots as they salute, the playing of taps by a lone burglar, and a flap-draped coffin. One of the most moving parts of the ceremony is the presentation of the flag to the next king by an honorary guard. After the flag is meticulously folded, the presenter will usually kneel while presenting the flag and then state to the next king, on behalf of the President of the United States, Army, Marine Force, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. When Christ knelt down to wash the feet of his disciples, he demonstrated that he loved them to the end of the earth. 1 John 13, verse 1. Kneeling before his disciples or his followers who would later abandon him, Jesus showed them that the highest form of love is self-sacrificing. The very act of kneeling down is a reminder to not lift oneself up in feeling of supremacy, but rather show love without jealousy or prejudice. It is a call to love all people. And Jesus did that so he could show us love. Let's read Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 10 together. Can you all see it? Is that clear? All right. But the Lord 1:2. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God, the eternal King. When he is angry, the earth trembles. The nations cannot endure his wrath. Tell them this: these gods who did not make the heavens and the earth will perish from the earth and from the heavens. Do you know God himself is the God who breathed life and make us a living soul. He himself is life. Sometimes we take life for granted. We think that the day our lives will continue like this for the rest of however long we may be. But any moment of our lives could be cut short. I could walk out this door and be run over by a car. That's the end of my life. But is my life with God? Am I living the life that he wants me to live? John chapter 11, verse 38 to 44. Do you remember the story of Lazarus? One of the most iconic stories in the Bible. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." But Martha, the sister of Lazarus, who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who were standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you have sent me." Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." We talked about point number 2, which was God is life. See, this man had died for 4 days and he was buried. People had buried him. They accepted his death and he was now a memory. Then this man comes along. His name is Jesus, and he says, "Roll back the stone." But Jesus, he's been dead for 4 days. It's now a stench. There is a smell. But Jesus says, "Roll back the stone." And he calls forth, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus, all bandaged up, he walks out of the tomb as if he has never died. You know, Jesus is life. Even after we have died, what do you think is going to happen? For those who are righteous, Jesus will bring us back to life. For those who are dead, they are sleeping, awaiting the trumpet sound. For the righteous who are dead. And on that day when the trumpet sounds, all the dead in righteousness shall rise and meet him in the air. Jesus is life. Do not forget. The first one was that the very nature of God is love. The second point, God is life. Do not forget that. Let's go to our next illustration. For those of you who do not know this picture, this baby sleeping here is Narija. So this was the day Narija was born at 36 weeks, and she was 1.7 kilograms when she was born. She was very tiny. AJ and I were looking at some pictures that he brought in. So my husband's wedding ring, I didn't put it up here, But my husband's wedding ring, I took it out and I put it in her arm. So it was like a um, bangle. Yeah, like a bracelet. That's how tiny she was. I've zoomed it in, so I want to make it a little bit bigger. But she was absolutely tiny, the size, the length of two tissue boxes. You put two tissue boxes together, that's how long Narija was, her length. So she was born at 7 months, yes, 37 weeks is 7 months. And she stayed in that incubator. They had the blue light on to make her grow. And she had the feeding tubes that would feed her. She stayed that way for 3 months until at 3 months, I was able to take her home. At 3 months, she was 2.7 kgs. So the doctor said, yes, you can take her home. She's okay now. But look at her now. She doesn't show any signs of premature. But there were two babies that were around her who were apparently sad to say, but they fell asleep. And Narija's incubator was in the middle of both of these babies. And when I look at God's life, I think of her. Because a week later, when they weighed her, she dropped down to 1.5 kilograms. Now, she was 1.79 when she was born, but then a week later, she dropped down to 1.5. And the doctors and nurses said, well, she's okay, because there was a machine that was helping her breathe. You can see all these wires that are attached from her. It's just this huge machine. So whenever we push that incubator, we'll also push that oxygen machine as well. So it was trying to make her breathe because she wasn't breathing properly on her own and she was too tiny. So every day every morning I'd wake up at 6 a.m. I was already discharged. I could go home, but she stayed in the hospital for 3 months. So every morning I would go to the hospital and I would sit in that incubator from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. when the hospitals would stop the visitation at Flinders. And I would sit there and I would pray. And then when the two babies who fell asleep, who were next to Narija, she was at the neonatal ICU. So they put her in the ICU there. So she was there. And when the two babies fell asleep, my heart began to pump extra hard. And we kept praying, God, please, this is our first child. We looked forward to her. She came a little bit early, but Lord, we give this to you. We had the church praying, Dita's church were praying, our families were praying back home, the conference was praying. And 1 month later, they took out the machine. 2 months later, I could feed her. She was being fed by the tubes. And then 3 months later, they gave the all clear to take her home. As I look back at when God is live, this is the very testimony of why I believe in a God who gives life. It doesn't mean that, death is not real. It means that death is real, but there is life after death. So we must dwell on the fact that while we are living, we will fall asleep because we live in a sinful world. But while we are living, we need to have our relationship with God at the standard where we need to be with Him in heaven. So some of the things that keeps us away from God, our priorities, the very habits that interrupt our devotion with God, all those things we need to analyze, and we need to think about what's really important. Do we want to be with Him in paradise, or do we not want to be with Him? Because I look around and I see so many people, the society lives as if the world will not end. They live as if Jesus is not coming back. They live as if the world is not going to be destroyed. So they live their lives recklessly. They live their lives without purpose. But I want to remind every one of us is that Jesus is coming back again, whether we like it or not. And that should be a warning sign to us. It doesn't matter that you don't want him to come back. The fact is he's coming back. So we got to accept it and we have to live with it. But in order to be with him in paradise, we need to make the first changes in life. We need to accept that he is life. Of course, the last point I want to bring to you is Jesus saves. Do you believe that he saves? Yes, I believe that he saves. He absolutely saves. For some of our folks who probably might know your history, do you know the history of these two ships? No? Halifax Harbor. That's in Canada. All right. This is one of the best history lessons for school children. Take note. I'm going to tell you about a man by the name of Vince Coleman. Vince Coleman is my hero. Not my hero, but for some of historians who want to tell a really good story about someone who gave his life so that 2,000 people would be saved. So Vincent Coleman was working at a railway dispatcher when a French cargo ship, so you see a French cargo ship that was loaded with wartime explosives, accidentally collided with a Belgian ship. So there are two ships. One is French and one is Belgium. And on the day that the collision would happen on December 6, 1917, Vince was working as a dispatcher. And he worked in a little room and he was kind of signaling what ship's coming in, what ship's going out, which train is coming in, what train is going out. And this particular man was working on that morning when he saw from a distance the explosion of two of the ship. And he knew that 20 minutes later, there was going to be a train filled with 2,000 people heading towards that side of the island. And because of the explosion, it had blown up the railway stations, the railway lines, and there was no way that the trains would get to the other side. So he tried, as a dispatcher, he wanted to let the train conductor know that there had been an accident and he needed to stop the train. So from a distance, he could see the crash and the column of black smoke rising high above the where he was. All of a sudden, as he was in his dispatcher in his little wooden room, a Navy sailor runs in and says to him, "You need to let everybody know that the ship has exploded and there is smoke everywhere, and that they need to leave the towns and the cities." The explosion had caused the nearby houses to catch up in flames, and of course they had only 20 seconds to make it out of that little wooden room. But those 20 seconds were so precious to him because just 20 seconds earlier, he had made a telephone call to the train station to let them know that there had been an explosion and he needed to stop the train. 5 seconds went by. There was no reply. 10 seconds went by. There was no reply. The young sailor runs in and says, "Vincent, we gotta go. There is no time. If we keep standing here, we will die. We need to leave." But Vincent remained on guard and he said, "No, I need to know that the train has got my message." At the very 20 seconds, the message came back. Affirmative, we've got the warning. We will stop the train. And that was the very moment where Vincent Coleman knew that it was too late for him to leave that wooden room. He stayed behind, tapped out one last message on the telegraph: hold up the train, the ships are on fire, and go for Pier 6. Goodbye, boys. I'll see you later. And that was the last message that Vincent leaves. God's left us a message. It's here. The messages that he has left are filled with warnings, are filled with an escape plan, are filled with what's going to happen. Very detailed, very precise, absolutely filled with every caution that we need to take to get out. If we have not been paying attention to the message and making an attempt to reread the final messages that God has left for us, we will not make it alive when the time comes, make it out alive. Vincent saved 2,000 people on that train because he was willing to stay behind, sacrifice his life, and be on point. Romans chapter 5 verse 8 says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were all sinners, still sinners, Christ died for us." We don't have to do anything. He took the prize and he nailed himself to the cross so that you and I could be saved. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John 15, verse 13. I think that's the last text I want to leave with you. This is the final slides. The current events has brought into humanity so many uncertainties. You know, this could be the very moment for us to step up and share what love looks like. You know, very soon you will see people looking for God. They will look for God in places where they know that they want to find God. And we want to be those light bearers. We want to be that last dispatcher that's going to tell them, this is what love looks like, and this is where you will find love. So as we continue our daily lives in this really chaotic world, there's so many things that are happening in this world. We continue to light that love, that light, so that people who are looking for him will find him. Especially for Port Augusta Seventh-day Adventist Church, this is where we want them to find God. We want them to know him, and we want them to stay in here. And so we can all meet Jesus when he returns. Thank you, everyone, for listening.